The science behind why some people feel drained after social events. You just spent the evening at a party. You smiled, you laughed, you engaged in conversation. To everyone else, you seemed fine, maybe even like you were having a good time. But the moment you get home, you feel completely exhausted. Not just tired, but drained, like someone pulled the plug on your energy reserves. And while people tell you it's just introversion, what if I told you the neuroscience behind social exhaustion reveals something far more complex and darker about how certain brains process human interaction? Today, we're dissecting why some people feel depleted after socializing, and the research shows it's not about being antisocial or weak. It's about fundamental differences in how the brain processes social information and regulates energy. Let me start with a study that challenges everything you think you know about social exhaustion. In 2018, researchers at the University of Helsinki published findings in the journal Neuroimage that used PET scans to measure actual brain metabolism during and after social interactions. They found that individuals who reported feeling drained after socializing showed significantly higher glucose consumption in multiple brain regions during social tasks compared to those who felt energized. Their brains were literally burning more fuel to process the same social information. This wasn't psychological. This was metabolic. Their brains were working harder, and that work had a measurable energy cost. Before we go deeper, you need to understand what's actually happening in your brain during social interaction. Socializing is one of the most cognitively demanding activities humans engage in. You're simultaneously processing facial expressions, tone of voice, body language, conversational content, social hierarchies, cultural norms, and your own responses. You're running what neuroscientists call social cognition networks that involve the medial prefrontal cortex, the temporoparietal junction, the superior temporal sulcus, the amygdala, and the anterior cingulate cortex all working together. For some people, these networks operate efficiently with relatively low energy expenditure. For others, the same networks require significantly more resources. A 2019 study published in Social Cognitive and Affective Neuroscience examined what they called social processing efficiency using fMRI imaging. They had participants engage in various social tasks while measuring brain activation patterns. What they found was striking. People who reported social exhaustion showed what the researchers called inefficient network activation. Essentially, their brains were recruiting more regions, showing more diffuse activation, and demonstrating less specialized processing compared to people who found socializing energizing. It's like the difference between a well-oiled machine that does exactly what it needs to do versus a machine that's working harder, using more parts, generating more heat to accomplish the same task. Both machines get the job done, but one consumes far more energy in the process. But why do some brains process social information less efficiently? The answer takes us into genetics, early development, and neurological differences. Research published in 2020 in the journal Molecular Psychiatry identified specific genetic variations associated with what they called social sensitivity. These genetic variants affected dopamine and serotonin receptor expression in brain regions involved in social processing. Individuals with certain variants showed heightened neural responses to social stimuli, meaning their brain reacted more intensely to the same social information. This heightened reactivity comes with a cost. When your amygdala responds more strongly to every facial expression, when your anterior cingulate cortex is more active in monitoring for social threats, when your mentalizing network works harder to interpret others' intentions, you're burning through mental energy faster. It's like having a car engine that revs higher to achieve the same speed. You'll get where you're going, but you'll consume more fuel and generate more wear on the system. A fascinating 2021 study from Cambridge University, published in Nature Human Behavior, examined what happens in the brain specifically during the transition from socializing to solitude. They used portable EEG devices that participants wore throughout the day, capturing brain activity during natural social interactions and during alone time. What they found reveals the mechanism behind social exhaustion. During social interactions, participants who experienced social drain showed sustained high-frequency beta and gamma wave activity in frontal regions, indicating intense cognitive engagement and active processing. But here's what's crucial. This heightened activity didn't stop immediately when the social interaction ended. It persisted for 30 to 90 minutes after socializing stopped, gradually declining back to baseline. Their brain couldn't quickly downshift from social mode to rest mode. It was like an engine that keeps running hot even after you've turned off the ignition. In contrast, people who felt energized by socializing showed a rapid return to baseline activity within 5 to 10 minutes of ending social interaction. Their brains could efficiently switch states. The people who felt drained were essentially stuck in high processing mode long after the social stimulus was gone, continuing to burn energy ruminating, replaying conversations, analyzing interactions, even when they were alone. Now let's talk about the role of sensory processing in social exhaustion, because this is a factor most people completely miss. Research published in 2019 in the Journal of Abnormal Psychology found a strong correlation between sensory processing sensitivity and social exhaustion. Sensory processing sensitivity refers to how intensely the nervous system responds to sensory input: sounds, lights, textures, temperatures, smells. The researchers found that individuals with high sensory sensitivity showed significantly more social exhaustion, and brain imaging revealed why. Social events are sensory-rich environments. Multiple conversations creating noise, music, visual stimulation, physical proximity to others, varying temperatures, food smells, tactile sensations. For people with sensitive nervous systems, the brain is processing not just the social information, but also managing sensory overload simultaneously. The study used what they called dual processing load measurements, assessing both social cognitive load and sensory processing load during social events. High-sensitivity individuals showed elevated activation in both social cognition networks and sensory processing regions. They were essentially running two demanding programs simultaneously, which exponentially increased the energy cost. By the end of a social event, their nervous system was overwhelmed not just by the social interaction, but by the entire sensory environment. A 2020 study published in Biological Psychology examined the physiological markers of social exhaustion. The researchers measured cortisol, heart rate variability, and inflammatory markers before, during, and after social events. People who experienced social drain showed a specific physiological signature: elevated cortisol during socializing that remained high for hours afterward, reduced heart rate variability indicating a stressed nervous system, and increased inflammatory markers suggesting the body was treating socializing as a stressor. What's particularly striking is that this physiological stress response occurred even during objectively positive social interactions. The participants weren't attending hostile events or having conflicts. They were at parties, dinners, friendly gatherings, but their body was responding as if they were under threat. The nervous system was in a state of hypervigilance, constantly monitoring, constantly alert, constantly burning resources to maintain the social engagement. Let's examine the role of masking, because this is where social exhaustion becomes particularly dark. Research published in 2021 in the journal Autism examined what's called social camouflaging, or masking, where people suppress their natural behaviors and mimic socially acceptable ones during interactions. While this research focused on autistic individuals, the findings apply to anyone who feels they can't be authentic in social situations. The researchers found that masking requires enormous cognitive resources because you're essentially running two parallel programs: your authentic internal experience and your performed external presentation. Brain imaging showed that during masking, there was increased activation in executive function regions, particularly the dorsolateral prefrontal cortex, indicating active suppression and control. You're not just socializing. You're actively inhibiting your natural responses while simultaneously performing scripted behaviors. The study measured mental exhaustion after social events where participants masked heavily versus events where they could be more authentic. The difference was dramatic. High masking events resulted in exhaustion scores 4.2 times higher than low masking events. The energy cost of pretending to be someone you're not, of constantly monitoring and controlling your presentation, is staggering. And for many people, every social event requires some level of masking. A 2019 study in the Journal of Personality and Social Psychology examined what they called regulatory depletion in social contexts. The ego depletion theory suggests that self-control is a limited resource that gets depleted with use. The researchers found that social situations requiring more self-regulation, more suppression of authentic responses, more monitoring of behavior led to greater subsequent exhaustion and reduced capacity for additional self-control tasks. They used a clever experimental design where participants attended social events and then afterward completed tasks requiring self-control. like resisting tempting foods or persisting on difficult problems. People who found socializing draining showed significantly impaired performance on these subsequent tasks compared to their baseline. The social interaction had literally depleted their self-control resources, leaving them with less capacity for other demanding activities. Now let's talk about the role of social anxiety in amplifying social exhaustion. Research published in 2020 in the journal Behavior Research and Therapy found that social anxiety doesn't just make social situations more distressing, it makes them exponentially more exhausting. The reason is that social anxiety activates threat detection systems that require enormous energy to maintain. Brain imaging during social interactions showed that socially anxious individuals had sustained activation in the amygdala, the anterior cingulate cortex, and the insula, regions involved in processing threat and monitoring for danger. They weren't just engaging in conversation. They were simultaneously running a constant threat assessment program, scanning for signs of judgment, rejection, or embarrassment. Every facial expression was analyzed for negative evaluation. Every pause in conversation was interpreted as awkwardness. Every laugh was questioned. Are they laughing with me or at me? This hypervigilance is exhausting. The study measured cognitive resources using dual task paradigms, where participants had to socialize while also performing cognitive tasks. Socially anxious individuals showed dramatically impaired performance on the cognitive tasks, indicating that social interaction was consuming so much of their mental resources that little was left for anything else. They were operating at maximum capacity just to maintain the social interaction. A fascinating 2021 study published in Personality and Individual Differences examined the difference between extroverts who feel drained after socializing versus introverts. The common belief is that introverts always feel drained and extroverts always feel energized, but the research shows it's more complex. The study identified a subset of extroverts who experienced social exhaustion and found that the key factor wasn't introversion versus extroversion. It was authenticity and social demands. Extroverts felt drained when social situations required them to suppress their natural high energy, when they had to engage in small talk rather than deep conversation, or when they were with people they didn't genuinely connect with. Introverts felt drained by large groups, high-stimulation environments, and superficial interactions. But both groups felt energized by social situations that allowed authenticity and genuine connection. The exhaustion wasn't about amount of socializing. It was about the quality and the fit between the person's natural style and the social demands. Research on what's called social recovery time provides important insights. A 2020 study in the Journal of Research and Personality tracked people's energy levels and mood throughout days with and without social events. They found that people who experienced social drain needed significant recovery time, often several hours of solitude, to return to baseline functioning. Without this recovery time, the exhaustion accumulated, leading to what the researchers called social burnout. The study identified warning signs of social burnout: increased irritability, desire to cancel plans, feeling resentful of social obligations, physical symptoms like headaches or muscle tension, difficulty concentrating, and emotional numbness. These symptoms weren't just psychological preferences. They were indicators of a nervous system in need of recovery, similar to how athletes need rest days after intense physical training. Let's examine the neurochemistry of social exhaustion. A 2019 study published in Psychoneuroendocrinology measured neurotransmitter levels before and after social events using advanced neuroimaging techniques. They found that people who experienced social drain showed different patterns of neurotransmitter change compared to those who felt energized. Specifically, socially exhausted individuals showed decreased dopamine in reward centers after socializing, even after positive interactions. Their brain's reward system wasn't being reinforced by social contact. They also showed decreased serotonin, associated with mood and well-being, and increased levels of cortisol, the stress hormone. Their neurochemical profile after socializing looked similar to someone who had just completed a stressful task, not an enjoyable activity. In contrast, people energized by socializing showed increased dopamine and serotonin, decreased cortisol, and increased oxytocin, the bonding hormone. Their brain was being rewarded for social contact, creating a positive feedback loop that made them seek more social interaction. The exhausted individuals' brains were essentially punishing them for socializing, creating a negative feedback loop that made them avoid or dread social events. A 2021 study in Frontiers in Psychology examined what happens when people who experience social drain force themselves to maintain high levels of social activity. Using longitudinal tracking over 6 months, they found that sustained high social engagement without adequate recovery time led to increased depression, anxiety, physical health complaints, and cognitive impairments. The participants weren't adapting to higher social demands. They were deteriorating under them. The study challenged the common advice to just push through or exposure will make it easier. For some people, forced, sustained social exposure without recovery time didn't lead to adaptation. It led to breakdown. Their nervous system needed downtime to recover, and denying that need had real consequences. It's like telling someone with a physical injury to just keep running through the pain. Sometimes rest isn't avoidance, it's necessary recovery. Research on different types of social interactions reveals important nuances. A 2020 study published in Social, Psychological, and Personality Science found that not all social interactions are equally draining. The researchers categorized interactions along several dimensions: superficial versus deep, obligatory versus chosen, large group versus one-on-one, high stimulation versus low stimulation. They found that the most draining combinations were superficial obligatory interactions in large groups in high stimulation environments. Think networking events, large parties where you don't know people, corporate social functions. The least draining and sometimes even energizing for typically drained individuals were deep chosen interactions one-on-one or in small groups in low stimulation environments. Think dinner with a close friend at home, a quiet walk with someone you trust. The implications are crucial. The exhaustion isn't necessarily about the amount of social contact, but about the type. Someone might be completely drained by a 2-hour party, but energized by a 4-hour deep conversation with a close friend. The introvert label oversimplifies a much more complex neurological reality about what kinds of social interactions are metabolically costly for different nervous systems. A 2019 study in the journal Emotion examined the recovery behaviors people use after draining social events. They identified several patterns: complete isolation and rest, passive activities like watching TV or reading, active solitary activities like exercise or hobbies, and creative expression like writing or art. Brain imaging showed that different recovery activities had different effects on nervous system restoration. Complete isolation and passive activities led to faster reduction in stress markers, but slower restoration of energy and mood. Active solitary activities and creative expression actually showed the fastest full recovery, reducing stress while also restoring energy and positive mood. The researchers proposed that the brain needs not just cessation of social demands, but also positive engagement in non-social activities to fully recover. Let's talk about the workplace implications, because this is where social exhaustion creates serious problems. Research published in 2021 in the Journal of Occupational Health Psychology examined employees who experienced social drain and found that open office environments, frequent meetings, and constant collaborative work were significant sources of burnout for these individuals. The study used experience sampling throughout workdays and found that socially draining employees showed declining cognitive performance across the day in high social demand jobs, while their performance remained stable in roles allowing more solitary work. The issue wasn't competence or work ethic. Their nervous system was being depleted by constant social processing, leaving fewer resources for actual work tasks. The researchers identified workplace accommodations that helped: options for remote work, private workspace when in office, meeting-free time blocks, written communication options, and respect for focus time. These weren't special treatment. They were necessary adjustments for nervous systems that process social information differently, similar to how ergonomic accommodations help people with physical differences. Now let's examine research on the long-term health consequences of ignoring social exhaustion needs. A 2020 longitudinal study published in Health Psychology followed individuals over 10 years, tracking their social activity levels, recovery patterns, and health outcomes. People who consistently pushed through social exhaustion without adequate recovery showed significantly higher rates of anxiety disorders, depression, chronic fatigue, autoimmune conditions, and cardiovascular problems. The mechanism appears to be chronic stress. When you regularly deplete your nervous system without allowing recovery, you're maintaining elevated stress hormones, inflammatory markers, and sympathetic nervous system activation. Over years, this chronic stress damages multiple body systems. The social exhaustion wasn't just discomfort, It was a signal from the nervous system that resources were depleted and recovery was needed. Ignoring that signal had real health costs. Research on mismatched social expectations provides another angle. A 2021 study in the Journal of Social and Personal Relationships found that people who experienced social drain often felt pressured by social norms that don't match their nervous system's needs. Cultural messages like, "more friends is better," "you should enjoy parties," "networking is essential," "being alone is sad," created internal conflict and shame. The participants described feeling broken or wrong for needing recovery time after socializing, for preferring small gatherings to large parties, for finding small talk exhausting rather than enjoyable. This shame led many to force themselves into social situations that depleted them, creating a cycle of exhaustion, resentment, and avoidance. The study found that self-acceptance of one's social energy patterns was the strongest predictor of well-being, even stronger than the amount of social activity itself. For those watching who feel drained after socializing, I need you to understand something crucial. This isn't a character flaw. It's not antisocial behavior or rudeness. It's a neurological reality about how your brain processes social information. Your nervous system is working harder than others during social interaction, burning more energy, recruiting more resources, maintaining higher activation. This has measurable metabolic and physiological costs. The answer isn't to force yourself to be more social or to push through the exhaustion. That's like telling someone with a sprained ankle to just run faster. The answer is understanding your nervous system's needs and designing your life accordingly. That might mean fewer but deeper social connections, smaller gatherings instead of large parties, more recovery time between social events, choosing social situations that allow authenticity over those requiring performance. It also means challenging the cultural narrative that social exhaustion is something to overcome. Sometimes what looks like introversion or social anxiety is actually a nervous system that processes information differently, that needs different inputs and different recovery patterns to function optimally. Your brain isn't wrong, it's just different. And operating according to someone else's nervous system specifications is a recipe for burnout. For those who don't experience social drain, understanding this research should change how you view people who need alone time after socializing, who turn down invitations, who leave parties early, who seem withdrawn after group activities. They're not being difficult or antisocial. Their nervous system is telling them resources are depleted and recovery is needed. Respecting that need isn't coddling. It's acknowledging neurological reality. The science is clear. Social exhaustion is real. It has measurable neural and physiological correlates, and it varies significantly between individuals based on genetics, brain structure, sensory sensitivity, and nervous system regulation. Some brains are efficient social processors that gain energy from interaction. Other brains work harder, burn more fuel, and require recovery time. Neither is better or worse. They're just different specifications for the same human experience. The question isn't whether you should feel energized or drained by socializing. The question is whether you're living in alignment with your nervous system's actual needs rather than society's expectations. Because pretending to be energized when you're depleted, forcing yourself into constant social engagement when your brain needs rest, and ignoring the signals your body sends about resource depletion doesn't make you more social. It makes you sick. And no amount of positive thinking changes the metabolic reality that your brain is burning fuel faster than you can replenish it.